On the Mayfly bench, this Kingsley 30-watt combo amp. So this amplifier was brought in by a very good customer of mine, and unfortunately has had a catastrophic failure. He was doing a lot of recording, and he was getting ready to do another session, and he turned it on and got a full-on sound. Turned down the volume controls, the sound stayed, and he started smelling something burning. So we've got some kind of component failure inside this thing. Now normally I like to power something up before I take it apart and start poking around. In this case, we're not going to do that. We're going to take it out of its chassis and do a visual inspection first. So here it goes. So taking a closer look at this when I get the back off, you can see that these two power tubes here have gotten really, really hot. The two inner ones seem fine, but if you look, there's a wattage switch over here, which is set in the down position. I have a feeling that that disconnects these two inner tubes and leaves those two connected. And I'm wondering if we've had a catastrophic bias failure inside there. Alright, we have the amp open on the bench, and some interesting things become apparent straight away. For one, it has a very unique half power switch. It appears that when the power switch, which is this guy over here, is flipped in different positions, it's creating a virtual ground between the two pairs of output tubes in which the two decoupling capacitors are attached. And that's kind of weird. But in all cases, all four tubes are operating at the same time. These two resistors here are the cathode resistors. This one for these pairs of tubes over here, and this one for those two pairs of tubes over there. It turns out that this particular resistor is open. It should be 130 ohms, but it's not. Yeah, that is measuring 70 meg. So I'm willing to bet that our issues are related in part to that coming open. So, because there was a major bias failure in this amplifier, and because one of the tubes tested completely dead, I'm going to start poking around looking for other things that possibly are damaged. And right now we're going to test the output transformer. Now how we're going to do this is I've got a little signal generator here set up, and it's putting 1 volt peak to peak at 500 hertz into the output of the output transformer. Then I'm going to measure the primary side of that transformer and see if voltage is coming through and see if the turns ratio is what we expect. Let's get to it. Okay, here's our signal generator. There's the device under test. So I have my trusty Fluke 73 set to measure AC voltage. We're going to first measure the output. So it's 0.6 volts AC RMS, which is equivalent to 1 volt peak to peak. Now measure the primary side. 7.2 volts RMS. Now the other side. 7.2 volts RMS. Well, I think that's a good sign. So with the output transformer looking okay, it's time to replace those cathode bias resistors. Now what was installed previously was a pair of them, 130 ohms at 5 watts each. Now in theory, 5 watts would have been fine if you do the calculations, but obviously one of them failed, so I'm going to replace them with 10 watt versions. I'm also going to up the resistance just a little. I'm going from 130 ohms to 150 ohms. In my experience with cathode bias amps with EL84 output tubes, it's a little safer if you run it just a little cooler. Doesn't change the tone, but still makes the tubes and the amp last a little longer. Let's do it. And the new resistors are installed. Not the prettiest job I've ever done, but they're serviceable. The person who built this amp originally did not leave me a lot of room. So they're in there surely as possible, insulated on the hot side. Okay, new cathode resistors have been installed. The output transformer has been checked, and I just spent some quality time in the shop with a bunch of EL84s and my tube tester. I've been measuring transconductance on a bunch of tubes that I've got partially in my stash and partially in the customer's stash, and I came up with a matched quad. So the plan is, we're going to install these tubes, we're going to fire up the amplifier on the dim bulb tester, and we're going to measure the bias current of each tube. Okay, we're all set up here on the bench. I've got the dim bulb tester in line with the main supply. Power to the amplifier is on, but it's on standby. We've got a dummy load hooked up over here, and we've got our voltmeter ready to go, so I think it's just time to turn it on and see what happens. So that's the inrush current you're seeing there. Okay, after spending some quality time on the bench, I've made the following measurements. So with the amplifier in full power mode, tube dissipation varies from 11.5 watts to 11.8 watts, all of which is below the maximum dissipation rating of the vacuum tubes. So I'm glad I upped the cathode resistor just a little bit. Now, things don't change too much when you go to half power mode. Dissipation stays at around 11.5 to 11.8 watts. There's current through both cathode resistors, and the tubes seem to be relatively well matched. So this is good news so far. So the amp is buttoned up, back together, and it's working well. I tried it in both full power and half power modes, and it sounds pretty good. So just like campsite rules, you always leave it better than you found it. So, higher wattage cathode resistors, so they're not going to go open on you in the future. Just a slightly larger value of them too, to lower the current through the output tubes, to keep the dissipation within the allowed range. And sounds great. See you next time.